as a heads up, we will be recording these calls. If you're not okay with that, we would have to ask you to leave. Otherwise, we hope you'll stick with us for the 2020 edition of the Adaptive Cards Developer Community Call. I'm in a guest location, so as a quick kind of just really interesting, why the heck am I wearing suspenders and all sorts of things? So I'm in the Microsoft Vancouver office where they run a really cool internship program up here, and we're getting 5 interns for Adaptive Cards. So we're kicking it off, and we're doing a hackathon up here in Canada called Lumber Hacks. So everyone's wearing suspenders and dressing like lumberjacks, and it's actually been a pretty fun time. We've got a giant surface screen with just a bonfire, so it's like the most expensive fake fire I've ever seen. So they're hacking right now on Adaptive Cards, and I did send them this invite, so I'm actually hoping maybe they'll come in and towards the end of this talk to, I just think it'd be great for them to see what these calls are like, how, I love these calls. I can't thank Dana enough for setting them up. They're just a cool way for me to interact with everybody in a kind of low stress environment. Like, let's just share stuff and have a conversation. So they might come in. We'll see if they do. I'm trying to make myself available and right by the lobby. So with that said, thanks for joining. If this is your first call or if it's a recurring call or you're a repeat guest, we meet every month on the second Thursday of the month. This is the first of 2020. The next call will be February 13th at 9 a.m. They're always at 9 a.m. Pacific time. You found this link. If you want to share this link with your friends, it's just ak.ms/Adaptive Cards Community Call. And you'll meet the team behind Adaptive Cards. I normally have a slide in here about me, but I'm Matt Heidinger. I'll probably be your host most of the time, but we like to bring in guests as we can. So with that said, the call agenda for today, I'll do a quick look. This will be a repeat thing. So if you're here all the time, you can zone out for this first few minutes because I do always want to get people on the same page and make sure everyone has an idea of what we're looking at. So there is some repeat stuff that we'll go through month to month, but I'll do a quick look at the roadmap. And a quick call out that we have been blogging more. We've got a couple on deck. A lot of the features, we've got some big features coming. We might show one of them. Becky here on the call is a developer on our team. Depending on how things go, or how time's looking, we might have a look at some of the features she's been working on. But I do want to call out that while this is a great place to interact with the team, we have been blogging more. So check out the blog at adaptivecards.io. And I've got one big sort of demo in the spirit of this hackathon. While I'm helping the teams as a coach, I also set aside some time and admittedly, I'll check who's on the call so my boss doesn't know. I've been avoiding email. I'm not going to lie. I've been avoiding email to kind of hack on some of these things so I could build a demo for this. So we're going to explore this concept of schema-driven UIs. So schema-driven UIs have existed forever. But I wanted to see if I could hack around on this concept of schema-driven adaptive cards. And that doesn't make sense to you. Hopefully it will by the end of the demo. And like I said, depending on time's going, we might show some more stuff like a feature in development around input evolution. So, okay, let's hop into it. So designer improvements, I just want to call out this link. This link existed. Let me paste it into the chat. There's the chat. Perfect. So this is just a link you can play with now. I actually haven't clicked on it since before Christmas, so hopefully it still works. But it is an evolution of all the things we're doing in the designer to help with data binding and templating. This problem that if you're using adaptive cards, you have likely come across in that the designer has every feature. It's the latest and greatest because it's a web app. It's always on the latest version, which means you can do things in adaptive cards that you might not be able to do in an app like Teams, which might be on version 1.0, or they still are on version 1.0. We're actively working on the 1.2 rollout. Just to tee off a question, if people are going to ask that, how are things going with that rollout? We hit some snags. The holiday break, if you were sitting on the call earlier, Dana and I talked about, it's really nice that in Microsoft, hey, come on in. This is one of our interns. Have a seat. Do you want to say who you are and what you're working on real quick? We're just talking to that camera.
Okay. I'm Raghav Mittal. I'm like a new intern here, and I'm really interested in working on adaptive cards.
Awesome.
And right now we're working on an extension which will be supporting. Right now we're supporting Chrome, but will be shifted to Edge Chromium.
Okay.
And what we're really doing is anything like we are doing on flight cards. Like we are working on Expedia.com.
Yeah.
So if you like book any flight, so we are working on an extension which will basically generate a card.
Yeah.
And you can basically be sharing it to Outlook or some other platform.
Okay.
And right now we're almost done with our extension. We have made a design of how our cards will look.
Okay.
And once we're done passing the URL of the flight ticket and some of the HTML we need, we'll be generating cards. And if you can copy that today, we'll show it to you.
Okay, cool. So you're generating cards from websites and then right now displaying them in a browser extension.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically in the browser, we'll have a portal. You will have all your cards and you can add, modify, share. I think share is not there yet.
Yeah, that'll be a tricky one for you. Yeah.
We're just showing it.
Cool.
Just for the sake of it, but like we'll be supporting it later.
No.
It's a scalable project, so.
Yeah, awesome. And you guys have till the end of the day.
Yeah.
Well, where are your suspenders today, though? Yeah, that's okay. I'm wearing mine.
Okay.
So cool. So maybe some more people will come in. Again, you're just kind of getting your hands dirty with adaptive cards, getting a feel for it, and hopefully they'll do a share out at the end of the day.
Yep.
So I'm walking through the people on the call, what we're working on. So again, I was kind of just saying, so this designer, there's some improvements coming to help you deal with the differences of versioning. So versioning is a problem. You can send cards to clients that might not be on the latest version. So we're trying to make the design tool more able to help you deal with a version you are targeting. So you can play with that here. We did release a Xamarin.Android preview right before the break. So if you're a Xamarin developer, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and if you could reach out in the chat, and again, I'll check the chat as we go for questions at the end. But if you're interested in the Xamarin stuff, we'd love to hear from you. We're actively working on it and trying to figure out what level of functionality we need to add to Xamarin to make Xamarin developers successful. So we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like an email from our developer, email me or Dana. So my email address I try to put on here over and over. Let me just type that in. Come on, Notepad. So matt.heidinger@microsoft.com. If you're working on Xamarin or anything, reach out to me and we'll get you in touch with the rest of the team. I'm going to skip this, the Power Automate connector for now, but last month, if you're a Power Automate developer, I demoed a Power Automate connector that lets you just build a card and use the template service without having to write any code. Which is a sweet spot, which actually leads me into this very crude slide that I built as I was sitting in this room earlier. But as I've been talking to some of these interns here, and it's always interesting as you wind back to the beginning and like try and explain adaptive cards. I'm still not that good at it. I've been doing this for 3 years and I still can't quite get it down to like a 5-minute explanation. So I thought this slide would sort of help, and it's not 100% accurate, so ignore that a little bit. But really, at the heart of this is the adaptive card JSON. Can I get this? Is that purple box in your guys' way? You guys aren't seeing that, are you? Okay, never mind. So really, at the heart of adaptive cards is the JSON, right? And at the start of it, you typically go to our designer. That helps you build the JSON. The better our designer gets, the less important the JSON is, and the more we can kind of hide that from you. But effectively, you have to pull that JSON out and then do something with it. You either send it to Teams, you send it to Outlook, you send it to your own apps, and then even those apps are running on different platforms. So even if you send it to Teams, it might land on iOS, Android, and their desktop app. So that's effectively the life cycle. Depending on what you're doing with adaptive cards, you may only care about this left half of the quadrant, or if you're a Teams developer, you certainly care about the right half. And some of you, if you're rendering cards in your own apps, you care about the full spectrum. So you're using every piece of adaptive cards. So this helps me, picturing the JSON in the center, helps me kind of frame or scope the conversation as we're having with people, and it helps figure out or at least tease out which part of this life cycle are we focused on, or really what part am I talking about. So with that said, the demo I'm going to build is really on this left side. And that's actually what a lot of interns are working on. And it's this concept of, okay, you've built this JSON and now you're sending it to an app, and that's great, and that all works. But you had to build that JSON. The template service, as we've talked about a little bit, and I'll do a quick recap. The whole hope of the template service is that if someone else wrote a card template, well, then why should you have to write your own? The cheapest way to get anything done is to have someone else do it. And the template service is helping with that. And in that vein, I've started to explore this concept of schema-driven adaptive cards. And so, again, the whole hope on this is to build a card for you without you having to do any work. The rest of the equation, the rest of this life cycle, all stays exactly the same. You got the JSON, you're sending it to Teams, you're sending it to Outlook, all of this stays exactly the same. It's how did the JSON get created? Did you have to do it? Could you leverage other people's work? That's really the part we're talking about, to really help people just get productive with adaptive cards quickly if someone else has already done something similar. So with that said, let me switch over to a demo. This is something that I've been talking with the interns as well as they're getting, started with software engineering. The reality is, even with adaptive cards, we like to think it's new and inventive, and it is in a lot of ways, but it's also very similar in a lot of ways. A lot of the things we're doing, someone's done before, and thankfully I took my own advice and searched for who else is doing schema-driven UIs. So actually, let me take a quick step back and describe schema-driven UIs. So when I say schema-driven UI, this is a concept that's existed in our industry for a long time. You've got a schema. Back when XML was king, it was XSDs and schemas like that. But there's some kind of schema that describes your data. And now with JSON being the primary thing, a lot of people are using JSON schema. So this is, you can search for this. I just searched for React JSON schema form. This is a tool that someone wrote for React that takes in the JSON schema. So this is saying, a title, a registration form. So my registration form. And you can see the card over on the right, or it's not a card, the form that's generated on the right is being built based on the schema. So my, form, I can say what fields are required. Again, I'm describing now the shape of my data. This has nothing to do with UI. This is just describing the shape of my data. So the properties in this data are first name, which is a string. It has a title, and it has a default value. If I want to make first name required, I go up to the required section and I say first name is required. If I delete this or make a typo, actually, let me just delete it, because you'll see this asterisk over here. So the UI that's getting generated is using this metadata to say, okay, what's the property? It's first name. What's the title? It's first name, my first name. You can see the title is changing. And that little asterisk is added because I've said it's required. So take this concept and let's see if we can do the same thing with adaptive cards. And that's really the hackathon. So I was kind of telling everybody I've been hacking away on the hackathon as well. So this is the thing that I built up. And we're going to take this same concept. So we're going to take this JSON schema. Again, JSON schema has nothing to do with UI. It's just a standard way of describing a schema over data. So we're going to take this form we just built, and I'm going to head over to Postman. And let me just make sure everything's working before I unwind it. And okay, perfect. So as a quick refresher, the adaptive card template service, I'll pull up templating, is a proof of concept service that we're continuing to iterate on that makes it easy for people to discover, share, contribute, and collaborate on card templates. And again, as a really quick refresher on what the heck is a template, the only difference between a template and a card is that a template has, let me delete some of these, a template has these curly brace tokens in it. It has some data that will be provided at runtime. And we have a preview mode in the designer that lets you preview this card template with some sample data. So down here, this is a design time experience so that you can see what your card template will look like. This is the card as you've always seen, whereas it has these curly brace titles. The curly brace, that's the dynamic token that will be provided at runtime. But sample data gives you a really nice design time experience to just see what your card will look like with different types of data. So this we've released in preview. You can get started with templating. I believe the URL, let me just check it, aka.ms/ac templating. I think that should be right, aka.ms/ac templating, and it'll take you to, this page to get started with templating. So templating exists. You can get started with it today. You can play with it in the designer, and it just helps you create this card that now you can reuse, fill it with different data. You don't have to put your content inside the card or do some other, invent your own mechanism for putting in that dynamic data in the card. So that's templating. The template service is something that tries to put all this together and provide a place, and I'll show that as well. We have a GitHub repository called Adaptive Card Templates. It's a separate GitHub repository where all of our templates currently are. And this is where the templates live. It's just a flat JSON file. So once you've created a template, we typically, you could put it in this, GitHub repository, and then the service would make it available to you at templates.adaptivecards.io. And so I always struggle with how much recap you want to give. Hopefully everyone's mostly following along if you haven't seen this before. But what I have here is a local version of this service. And I've added a new method or endpoint to the service that's called from schema. So what Postman is doing, this is just a tool, if you're not familiar with Postman, to do HTTP requests. It just makes it very easy to do HTTP requests. And so what I'm doing, not a GET, rather I'm doing a post. So I'm doing a post to this URL. This is my local version. But by the end of the day, by the end of the hackathon, before I take my suspenders off, I will have deployed this to the service. So everyone on the call will be able to play with this. And we'll iterate it. The reason I really wanted to show this very raw is because I think this is a neat concept. And the challenge you always have with schema-driven UI is, well, how do I customize it now? What type of levers do I have? You've generated this UI, but how do I tweak it or how do I make it quite mine? There's always the trade-off when you're generating something. How do you still give that level of customization and control? So here's what exists today. I'm doing an HTTP post to this URL, and my post body is exactly pasted from, I'll just grab the exact one we were just making on this React form. So I'm calling it my form, a simple form example. And I'm just going to take this. I'm going to take this schema as it is. I'm going to put it in the post body. So I'm doing an HTTP post to the service at from schema. And when I get back, should be an adaptive card. So this is the response. And I will just paste this into the card designer. And here's what we get. So we get my form, a form for editing, my form. It's got first name, it's got label, it's got that default value of Chuck, and it put in some submit and cancel buttons. But it generated a form for me. It said, here's my just pure schema, as in here's the properties, here's the title, here's the default, and we generated the adaptive card for you. This all lends itself into, you'll notice some things are missing, like, well, how does the required stuff work? We don't have the asterisk in there. That actually lends itself nicely to what Becky on the call, a developer on our team, is actively working on, this concept of input evolution and how can we really evolve our input stories such that you can have required hints, or whether this field should be required or whether it should have some kind of regular expression to validate, to really add the client-side validation, as well as how should the label be presented? If it's required, do you want to have little asterisk, or do you prefer that your required labels are bold? And so we're starting to tease apart, what does it really mean to describe the semantics of collecting data? Because right now, what you'll see is this input for Chuck down here, it has a text box above it for my first name, text block rather. So this is a text block. This is an input. there's no semantic association between the two. My service, all it did was it generated a text block for the label, and then it put in an input text. And this is fine if you're just looking at it visually, but there's a lot of concern when it comes to accessibility or screen readers, because if I'm low vision and I'm trying to get to this input, we do have the title here. So a screen reader would interpret this title, but you lose things like accessibility and as well as this ability to kind of reflow. What if I'm on a really wide but short screen? Because adaptive cards can be delivered to devices or apps with different visual characteristics. What if I want the label next to the input? Or as it gets narrower, I want it to, stack up like it does. So we have no ability to do that today with adaptive cards because it just says, hey, here's my text block and here's the text. And there's really no correlation, or rather the input, as there's no correlation between them. So I think this lends itself nicely to the things that Becky's working on. And since we actually seem to have, plenty of time left over, I might kick it over to her really quickly if you want to raise awareness, Becky, to the spec you're working on. I think it's public so that people contribute to it. Is that right, Becky?
Yeah, sure. So there's actually a pull request out now for the spec that we're working on, and you can see our discussions there.
So yeah, if you go to our GitHub, go to polls, it's 3663.
Yeah, and it's in progress. Nothing there is set in stone yet. You can see some of our discussion on it, and the discussions are ongoing. So definitely don't take this as, finished spec, but if you're interested in the discussion, feel free to jump in. We're open to input for sure.
What are the high level things that you would how would you describe, what we're looking at?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and grab the screen from you. Okay, if that's okay, Matt. All right, so there's a couple of things we're looking at for inputs. The first is, as Matt was talking about, the semantic association between labels and inputs. And this is a prototype, and this is just one approach that we're considering. But what you can see here on this input, I've added a label property, and that's being rendered above here. You can see we've also marked this input as required, and that adds a little red star here to the label. Now, there's a number of ways we could represent that UI, but for the purposes of this demo, what we're doing is putting a little red star there. We're still having a lot of discussions around how that formatting would take place, whether there's some level of host control there, whether there's some level of card author input. So those are some of the issues we're discussing on that. You can also see we've added this required property and an error message property. So if you were to go into this field and not fill it out, it could tell you, hey, name is required, and that's that error message from here. So you can see if you tried to send without filling out your form, you would get all these error messages that the card author has specified. As Matt talked about, we're also going to have some sort of, in addition to required, some sort of type-specific validation. So here's an example with a regex. So I put a regex on here that requires the input to start with an uppercase letter. So you can see I didn't do that, and it validated the regex. And the required input. We also, the input validation also lets us enforce some of the hints and requirements that we have always had in our schema, but that have not always been enforced on all platforms. So, example, for number inputs, we've always had min and max. And some platforms supported that and some didn't, as we call out in our spec. But with the input validation, we can use that validation to validate those requirements as well. So those are some of the things we're looking at here.
What are some of the major, what are the key discussion points, or what are some things that you would like to draw attention to? If some people on this call, input is such, it is orders of magnitude the most commented on feature in product board. It's got some 58 votes, which is just crazy compared to the rest of our. So there's certainly a lot of people who have input on inputs. What are some of the kind of things you'd like to draw attention to or help us get clarity on?
Well, I would say the first thing is labels, as we were mentioning before, and how those are formatted. It's we're trying to tease apart whether it's important to hosts to have, say, required input labels be formatted the same way maybe in other parts of their app as they are in cards that they're receiving from their card authors. So one of the things we're looking at is how do hosts want to see that kind of formatting happen? Do they, do they want to be able to choose between required in bold versus required to have a star? Are they pretty much okay with star for everybody? And also on the card author side, how much control do card authors need and want? There's sort of a tension there between whether, if we give the card authors full formatting of their labels and the host wants to put all their labels in bold that are required, there's a tension there. So that's one issue where we're trying to kind of tease things apart. So if people have inputs or strong feelings on that, that's one topic. Also on when to do validation. So in this sample here that I was just showing you, I was validating as you tab through the form. So every time you get something wrong, so to speak, we pop up the error messages. Mm-hmm. Another possible approach, I've got a little checkbox here to check it, is to not show errors until you actually get to the end and choose send. I've seen some research that says it's better to show the inputs as you're going, but there was also some concern within the team whether that was too distracting, and it would be better to hold the errors till the end. So I think those are some of the big design issues that we're still working through. Was there something else you had in mind, Matt?
No, I think that's exactly it. The Becky alluded to it, but the debate we're having is an existential one that's existed in all of adaptive cards. How far should the pendulum swing for card author control versus host control? When we originally came up with the text block colors, we have good, attention, warning. We had 6 colors. We were like, is that going to be enough? Are card authors going to have enough? Certainly, there will be people that want more, and it's how do you manage that? How do we properly design and try and get as good as we can? That address that inherent tension of control and flexibility. And I think this is the biggest one we've had since probably the color debate from a few years ago. So it'd be great now that we have actual customers to actually hear from you. Most of you are on this call are most likely card authors. You're mostly card authors sending cards into Outlook or Teams, and some of you are probably rendering cards. Although some of you may be, from Cisco on this call, and you're rendering cards in your own apps as well. So it'd be great for us to, make sure we're talking to both types of audiences, try and understand their needs out of inputs, and try and come up with a solution that does its best to address everyone's needs. So the comment on that GitHub pull request would be a fantastic way to chime in and as this discussion is going on. So there was a question I'll just quickly flip to. So are you guys looking at rich text input, not talking a word editor, but bold, italic? So we actually do have, no, I was going to say, we have rich text block. That is read only. We don't have rich text input, do we?
I don't think we have.
I don't think we have. No, we haven't. And I'll just do what some of the advice that the interns were given too is if someone asks you a question, don't try and answer it on the spot. Just say, no, we don't know. Actually, I can't say that we thought about that. But Dennis, if you are aware, let me just send this link, aka.ms/AC features. This is, I'll actually just pull it up right now, aka.ms/AC features or AC roadmap. This is a tool we use called Product Board to have anyone vote and submit. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Hang on. Okay, good. He knows the board. Well, I'm going to share it again for people who don't. This is your best place to just submit an idea. The more detail you can provide, what would you like to do? Ideally, maybe like a comp or a screenshot if it is visual. How important is it? And then you just have to give us an email address. You don't have to create an account. You don't have to do anything else. It gives us a way to communicate back with you for clarification and discussion on it. And as it gets part of our planning, it moves over to this roadmap tab where you can kind of see what's launched, what's in development, what's coming when. I don't know why. Oh, the input stuff. We're currently, all the stuff Becky just showed as an FYI, we're calling it Q2 2020. none of this, obviously, I can't commit to release dates or anything as things are being, so this is our plan, but it's not guaranteed. The Microsoft Build Conference is probably what you can expect. It's a good opportunity for teams around Microsoft to align around releases. I think we've announced the dates. It's usually late spring, like April or May. I can't remember if we've announced the dates, but you can expect basically a lot of these big evolution or features like input evolution, templating, accessibility. We're looking at responsive UI. They're all really related. When you think of like the input evolution and this association of text blocks and labels, it gives us a lot more freedom to start addressing the varying display characteristics of the different hosts of adaptive cards as we get closer to a world where a single card can truly adapt in really expressive ways. And that becomes even more important to get that right as we get into things. If this concept, obviously it was just a prototype of schema-driven UIs, well, if I can only generate that thing once, I need to make sure that generated card is going to work great on narrow screens, wide screens, Microsoft Teams, Outlook. So we need some of these we need some more semantic information. We need things like responsive UI. So that's kind of a high level where the team's investing their time and energy in 2020. Were there any, the other thing I want to add, I started this whole thing. So as I was building out that schema generated code, I went on to GitHub and searched for JSON schema, and I found this project. I've been trying to reach out to these folks, but their email server is blocking me. I'm not really sure why, but it's a fire department in the UK, I believe, who has written this tool called CardScript, which is based on adaptive cards. It's actually built on adaptive cards, and they had written this. I forked their project, changed it a little bit, and basically that entire demo that I showed, the schema-driven UI, was standing on their shoulders. So I can't give them a big enough shout out. I was trying to reach out to them before this call, but it was really cool. Someone wrote this code from JSON schema. They call it CardScript, but it's an adaptive card, it's an adaptive card with additional things. It was really neat. Like, just a quick check on GitHub. Someone else has possibly done this. I didn't think they'd do it for adaptive cards, but so I was able to find that, and it made it so my hackathon day yesterday was spent on the fun stuff, not on parsing JSON and all the JSON schema kind of interesting stuff. So that was really neat. I'm hoping to reach out to them. They clearly built this for a reason. It'd be great if we can work together and find a way to deliver it. So that was really cool that they had written that. And so, yeah, this will be available on the template service. I'll document it later today. Hey, come on in. What's up? We're sort of just wrapping up. Another intern working on, that's where we're talking to the people. They're on this call. Yeah, we're kind of wrapping up. So you want to say who you are and what you're working on real quick to the fine people?
You want to see? Oh, we have someone on the call.
There are 39 people on the call. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So what are you working on?
I'm working on adaptive cards as well right now. We're in a hackathon. We're trying to build a GIS extension so we can get all the cards the user wants from the websites he's visiting. Let it be like, I don't know, restaurant reservation, hotel reservation, or buying an airplane ticket.
Cool.
So we're just trying to collect them all in GIS extension where you can see them and possibly share them in the future. So yeah.
How do you how far do you think you'll get by the end of the day?
I think we will have a product ready, but it's not going to be able to work with all the websites.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We probably going to have some websites manually coded so we can extract the data from them, because we didn't figure out how we can just make a robust engine in a way to actually grab the data from all the websites any way we want. So yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, I would offer you a seat, but I think we're just kind of wrapping up. So everyone on the call, please go to that link that I showed, aka.ms/AC features. Help us, look at the features we're working on, vote on them, tell us, it's how our team's prioritizing things. I had a link to a survey. Okay, I do, right before Q&A. I think I saved this. There's been a scramble here over trying to work in Vancouver. Go to this link, aka.ms/AC community survey. that is the more important one. We're trying to just, it's a little more, you get a little more opportunity. It's not a long survey. It shouldn't take very much of your time, hopefully, but it would be a great way to tell us, how satisfied are you with what you're doing with the community calls, a good forum to kind of communicate with us. It would be great if you could give us some feedback on that. We'll continue using these as we dive into more features like input evolution. Here's some links. Check out our Ignite session, the roadmap features, templating. I think I covered all that. We'll meet again on February 13th. And with that, I think we'll take it to questions. So actually, yeah, why don't you grab that seat if you want to hang out. We'll see if we get any Q&A questions. But yeah, that's anyone feel free to unmute if you'd like or chat. And Data, did we have any questions that you want me to look back on the thread at all?
I don't think so. I think did they all get answered? Let's see. I know. Are you guys looking into rich text input? Not talking full word editor, but bold, italic, and some bullet points.
Yeah, so we covered that one. We are not yet, but it'd be great if someone wanted to get that on our roadmap, so we can review it.
Is there any documentation on how to use SVG in adaptive image?
Unfortunately, SVG is not a currently supported feature. It might work on some platforms, like I think it works in JavaScript just because the browser will interpret an SVG image, but it wouldn't work across every adaptive card endpoint. Unfortunately, it is something we're looking at. I think if you look in our feature portal, it is one of the items in there. I will say, though, actually as a clarifying question, David, are you using SVGs to draw random graphics, or are you looking to use them as like glyph icons, like typically icons as you would expect? And while he's hopefully typing glyph icons, yeah. So we see a lot of that. So themable glyphs and icons is one of the main features we are looking at here. And this whole concept, there's a bunch of ways we can go about it. A lot of people are moving to fonts, a standard font face that has thousands of things. So I personally, across this website, use Font Awesome. I'm going to reach out to these folks. It's an open icon pack. I'm going to reach out to these folks, and we're at least considering. Again, this is just me spitballing right now, but we're considering standardizing on a open icon pack, because then it means now you can share these icons between hosts, between apps. So for example, if you want to have an email icon, you go to fontawesome.com, search for mail, and a whole bunch of, well, if it doesn't say pro, you can use it. So they have a bunch of different icons that you can represent email or shipping, and they're completely free and they're scalable, infinitely scalable and colorable, but they are represented as a font pack. So it's interesting that people are kind of using fonts to do these things now. So we're seeing SVG go a little bit by the wayside. So we've really started investing our energy on seeing if the font mechanism will work. So, okay, so you're using material design icons. Yeah. So it's actively being investigated. We don't have more to share, but again, if you do click on that feature in our roadmap, it would be fantastic if you can, provide some information like how you're using it. If you say it's critical for you, we are using this portal. The people who submit ideas to this, we're using this as an outreach opportunity as we do evolve this feature and start planning it. You could presumably expect an email from someone on our team saying, hey, just like Becky walked us through our input validation spec, to the people interested in a feature, we're really trying to get active engagement to make sure we do it right while it's still baking. So if you want to submit your thoughts there, that's a good opportunity for us to find you later. So there's a question on what's the business use case of this technology. That's a good question. I've had to talk about that a lot here as I introduce this technology to the interns that I'm working with right now. And for Microsoft, it's really reducing costs for our partner teams like Outlook, like Microsoft Teams. These Microsoft Teams, the app that we're all using today, is really only as good as the third-party software plugging into it. Like most platforms, right? They're extensible platforms, and they're enhanced by third parties integrating with them. As an example, as we go into my developer channel here, GitHub, Azure DevOps, it's a very easy feed for me to see what's going on in the development of the project. So these companies plug into Teams and enhance the power of Teams. And Adaptive Cards is a fantastic way for teams to build an extensible platform that they know will be safe, they know it will be fast, you're not running arbitrary code, and they know it will look and feel like Teams. This card looks and feels like Teams because it's an adaptive card. It's not just a free-form piece of UI where GitHub can just send anything they want, because then they could make it look poorly, which would make people think poorly of Teams potentially. So really, that's where we see the use case of this product. You've got an app. Most cases, it's not the only use case, but that is the main reason why we give it away for free, and it's open source, because it saves teams money and helps them build what they would need. Teams and Outlook and Cortana and all these platforms who want to open themselves up to extensibility with all the guarantees that the content will be native, the content will be fast, the content will look and feel good. And for those card authors, the GitHub and everyone, they can write this card once and know it'll look great on multiple apps. It saves them reduced costs for them as well. For Teams, Adaptive Cards or in the messaging extensions preview. I'm not aware of the previews, but I know this messaging extension right here, this is all powered by Adaptive Cards. So if I click on create a task, this whole thing is an adaptive card. I'm not sure which part is the preview, so I think it works. But if you want to reach out to me, Alexander, I can try and I don't work on Teams, but I'm pretty sure it works in messaging extensions. I've only seen it work though, so I unfortunately can't answer any specific details. But if you want to shoot me an email, I can try, not Gmail, I can try and get to the bottom of that. But I think it does work. Any other thoughts or questions? There was one in here. What about presence? I'm not actually sure what you mean by presence. If you could elaborate on that. And do we have an idea when Action HTTP will be supported in Microsoft Teams? We're using Adaptive Cards to retrieve data and post that back to Azure endpoints. It works great in Outlook. That's a fantastic question. We can't really dive into it in this call, but it's definitely a topic I think you're going to hear from. David Clow is on this call right now. Supporting this scenario of you just want to do this is something David's actively working on driving. I don't think we have anything really to share yet, but I'm sure it'll be a topic of one of these calls somewhere. Yeah,
so suffice to say that we've heard that feedback multiple times in the past. We do understand that there is currently an incompatibility between the two action models used by Outlook and Teams, and we do want to solve that problem. So indeed, in the hopefully not too distant future, we should be able to share what we envision as a solution for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We totally hear your pain, and we hope we're coming up with an even better solution than necessarily just the Action HTTP. Okay, well, thanks you two for joining. I'll let you get back to hacking. Thanks everyone for jumping on the call in 2020. We hope we'll see you next month. And the call will be live on YouTube, on Office Dev YouTube, so you can rewatch it or share it with your friends. I'll write a blog post summarizing everything. And we'll see you all next month. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.